1934. The first photo of the supposed Loch Ness Monster incites public frenzy and a torrent of tourists looking for Nessie.
People question the authenticity the moment this photo comes out in 1934. But many people still believe this thing is real.
For 90 years, every sonar sweep of Loch Ness has come back with the same useless answer. Nothing, no monster, no body, no proof. And then, in a laboratory 11,000 miles away from the Scottish Highlands, a sequencer finished scanning 250 water samples and finally cracked open what the sonar had been picking up the whole time.
What we do know is that the photo that's published is substantially cropped and zoomed in, which blurs the shape of the creature a bit and skews any sense of scale or perspective.
The Loch Ness Monster is real. The evidence is now overwhelming, and what is actually swimming in that dark water is not a plesiosaur, not a hoax, and not a single thing anyone has been hunting for since 1933. A lake unlike any other. Forget the postcards, forget the boat tours. Strip away 90 years of legend and you are left with one of the most physically strange bodies of fresh water on Earth. Loch Ness is 23 miles long and 755 feet deep at its deepest point. It holds more fresh water than every lake in England and Wales combined. And it sits directly on top of one of the largest active geological fault lines in the British Isles. The Great Glen Fault is 62 miles of geological violence. It splits the northern half of Scotland sideways from the southern half. The rocks on either side have shifted laterally by roughly 40 miles over hundreds of millions of years. Micro-earthquakes pulse along it on a regular basis, sending vibrations through the bedrock and into the water above.
And in 1994, the photo's whole provenance comes into question, thanks to a deathbed confession by a man named Christian Sperling.
Glaciers carved the lake along this scar during the last ice age, scooping out a trench so deep and narrow that sunlight only penetrates the first 100 meters. Below that, permanent darkness. The temperature locks at 5 to 6 degrees Celsius year-round. The water itself is stained brown by peat washing in from the surrounding moors, the same compounds that color Scottish whiskey. Visibility at depth approaches zero. You could hide a submarine down there. People have. You could hide almost anything. This is the environment that made the legend possible. Deep, dark, geologically active, and almost impossible to see into. And in 1933, a brand new road was about to drag that hidden world straight into the global spotlight. A water beast in the 6th century. Before the road, before any of the photographs, there was a manuscript that nobody outside medieval scholarship paid attention to for over 1,000 years. In 565 AD, a man named Saint Columba had crossed the sea from Ireland to bring Christianity to the Picts, the indigenous people of northern Scotland. According to a biography written about a century after his death, Columba arrived at the River Ness, the short river that drains the lake, and found locals burying a man who had been killed by a water beast.
St. Columba's account from 565 AD describes him commanding a creature to stop its attack on a swimmer in the River Ness.
When one of Columba's followers swam across the river, the creature rose to attack. Columba made the sign of the cross. The beast retreated. Modern historians treat this as religious literature, holy men commanding nature through faith. But buried inside the spiritual framing is the earliest written reference to something unusual in the waters near Loch Ness. 1,461 years ago, locals were already telling stories. And here's the thing nobody likes to say out loud. They were not making it up. Something was happening on that water. They just did not have the language for what it was. Scottish Highland folklore is saturated with water spirits. The Kelpie, the most famous, was a shape-shifting creature that lured travelers into lochs and rivers to drown them. Long before any missionary arrived, the cultural framework for believing in something living in the dark water was already in place. Generation after generation of people standing at that shoreline, seeing something real, reaching for the only word their world had given them. The framework was inherited, the sightings were not. Which is why, the moment the world finally got front-row access to that water, the legend exploded overnight. The road that created a monster. In 1933, a new road called the A82 was completed along the northern shore of Loch Ness. Before that road, the loch was nearly inaccessible. steep terrain, rugged shoreline, isolated communities. The world did not know what was happening on that water because the world could not get there. The road changed everything overnight. On April 14th, 1933, a couple named Aldi and John Mackay were driving along that brand new road when something in the water stopped them cold. An enormous animal, they said, rolling and plunging. The disturbance lasted nearly a minute before it sank and was gone. They reported it to a local water bailiff named Alex Campbell, who happened to also write for the Inverness Courier. Campbell published their account on May 2, 1933. He used a single word that would echo for the next century: monster. Within weeks, more sightings poured in. Within months, the story had jumped to the national newspapers in London. By the end of 1933, the Loch Ness Monster was an international phenomenon. The 1930s were the tail end of an era of explorers returning from remote corners of the Earth with stories of unknown species. The idea that something large might still be hiding in a Scottish lake did not seem ridiculous. It seemed inevitable. Then came the photograph that would seal the legend for 6 decades. On April 21st, 1934, the Daily Mail published it. A long-necked creature, a small head, a silhouette breaking the surface of the dark water. The photographer was a London doctor named Robert Kenneth Wilson, who refused to attach his name to it. The image became known simply as the surgeon's photograph. Anonymous, respectable, damning, and about to be unmasked as one of the most successful frauds in modern history.
But not everyone believes the image, known as the surgeon's photo, is authentic.
The 60-year hoax. In 1994, a man named Christian Sperling confessed on his deathbed. The monster in the photograph was a toy submarine. He had helped his stepfather, a humiliated big-game hunter named Marmaduke Wetherell, sculpt a plastic neck and attach it to the toy. The Daily Mail had publicly mocked Wetherell a year earlier, after his alleged monster tracks turned out to be made by an umbrella, Stan pressed into a hippopotamus foot. The photograph was revenge, a hoax to fool the newspaper that had ruined him. 60 years. The defining image of the Loch Ness Monster, the visual that anchored every documentary and every book sold in every gift shop along the lake, was a plastic neck on a toy submarine. And here is where I want to stop for a second. If you are still watching, you are the kind of person who wants to know what is actually in the water, not what someone wanted you to believe, not the toy submarine version, the real thing. That is what the rest of this video is about. Hit subscribe and stay with me, because what comes next is where 90 years of failed investigation finally starts to crack open. You would think a deathbed confession would end the mystery. It did not even slow it down. By the time Sperling spoke, the legend had moved into deeper water, and the people chasing it had stopped being photographers. They had become engineers with sonar. The sonar hunt. By the 1960s, the search had moved from photographers and fishermen to engineers and scientists. An aeronautical engineer named Tim Dinsdale filmed something moving through the water in April 1960. The Royal Air Force analyzed his footage. Their conclusion was carefully worded. The object was probably animate, not definitely, probably, and probably was enough to launch a decade of obsession. From 1962 to 1972, the Loch Ness Investigation Bureau ran a continuous watch of the lake. Volunteers stationed themselves along the shoreline with cameras and binoculars. They saw things they could never identify. In 1972, an American patent attorney named Robert Rines arrived with sonar arrays and underwater cameras. That same year, his enhancement screen lit up with an image that would haunt him for the rest of his life: the flipper photograph. Rines leaned in close as the computer processed the raw data frame by frame, the dark blur of the original underwater shot slowly resolving into something else. After heavy enhancement, what emerged appeared to show a diamond-shaped appendage attached to a massive body. Rines spent the rest of his life convinced he had photographed a plesiosaur. Critics argued the enhancement had simply created what he wanted to see. The argument was never resolved. Then, in October 1987, a naturalist named Adrian Shine pushed the investigation into territory nobody had ever attempted. He stood on the deck of his boat in the cold Highland air, watching as 24 vessels lined up across the loch in formation, their sonar arrays angled to overlap into a single curtain of sound. Operation Deep Scan. the entire lake was about to be swept simultaneously. Shine had been studying Loch Ness since the 1970s. He was the most important scientific figure in the modern investigation. When the operation ended, his sonar logs contained 3 large unexplained contacts, deep, moving, bigger than any known fish in the loch. Shine never claimed they proved anything. He just noted they were unexplained. They are still unexplained. In 2003, the BBC funded a survey with 600 sonar beams sweeping simultaneously. The result was announced as definitive. Nothing, no large unknown animal in the water. Case closed, except the case was not closed. Sonar bounces sound off solid surfaces. It works beautifully in open ocean. It struggles badly in narrow, deep, thermally stratified, sediment-stained, geologically active lakes, which is exactly what Loch Ness is. Every sonar survey conducted on that water carried a quiet asterisk. We did not find anything, but we might have missed something, and 3 of Shine's contacts from 1987 were still sitting there in the data, unaccounted for, until somebody asked a question nobody had thought to ask. The question nobody asked. Professor Neil Gemmell did not arrive at Loch Ness looking for the monster. He arrived looking for the water. Every living thing sheds DNA into its environment. Skin cells, mucus, waste. The genetic fingerprints float in the water column like dust in a sunbeam. The technique is called environmental DNA. Sample the water. Sequence the fragments. Identify what has been swimming through. The beauty of the method was that it did not care whether the monster surfaced or stayed hidden. As long as the creature was alive, it would leave a genetic signature. If a monster existed, the DNA would prove it. If a monster did not exist, the absence of unknown DNA would prove that too. In 2018, Gemmell and his team pulled 250 water samples from across the entire loch. Surface, middle depth, bottom, every region, every layer. They flew the samples back to the University of Otago. They processed them through the sequencer. Then they waited. When the results were announced in September 2019, something quietly historic happened. For the first time in the history of the Loch Ness mystery, somebody had a clean answer. No plesiosaur DNA. None. Not a single fragment. No unknown marine reptile. No exotic mammal. No mystery sturgeon. Nothing in the water that science could not already name. But the survey did find one thing, everywhere, at every depth, in every region of the loch, in concentrations far higher than the team expected. And the moment Gemmell saw the readouts, he knew exactly what they had to be. Eels. The eels. Nobody wanted to believe in European eels are not exotic. They are not extinct. They are not even rare. They hatch in the Sargasso Sea, drift across the Atlantic on ocean currents, and migrate up European rivers as juveniles. Loch Ness, connected to the sea by the River Ness, is well within their normal range. There was never any reason to be surprised that eels lived there. What was surprising was how many. The DNA suggested an eel population thriving in conditions that suited it almost perfectly. Cold, deep, dark, abundant food, almost no predation. The eels were everywhere, and they were doing extraordinarily well. Gemmell was careful with his conclusions. He did not claim the Loch Ness Monster was definitively an eel. He said the data was consistent with the eel hypothesis. He acknowledged that environmental DNA has its limits, but he also said something more important. The data ruled out everything else, and eels, it turns out, fit the witness descriptions disturbingly well. The long, undulating body, the serpentine movement, the dark shape rolling and plunging at the surface before vanishing back into the deep. Generations of witnesses had been describing something that moved like an eel. Nobody wanted to hear it. The problem has always been size. European eels normally top out around 4 or 5 feet. The classic Nessie sightings describe creatures 15, 20, 30 feet long. For the eel hypothesis to work, the eels in Loch Ness would have to be enormous. Is that possible? Look at the conditions. Permanent darkness at depth, no predators, abundant food, cold temperatures that slow metabolism and extend lifespan. Eels in captivity have been documented living over 150 years. A Swedish eel named Ailey survived in a well for more than a century and a half before dying in 2014. If the eels in Loch Ness can achieve anything close to that lifespan, individual specimens could reach sizes no marine biologist would believe without a body on a slab. No giant eel has ever been pulled from Loch Ness. No giant eel has ever been clearly filmed. But the environmental DNA gave the hypothesis the first piece of hard physical evidence it has ever had. The eels are there, the eels are abundant, and nothing else is. Which left one question wide open. What had Adrian Shine's sonar actually been picking up in 1987? The sounds in the deep. The investigation did not stop with the DNA. The sonar data still had ghosts in it, and somebody had to go back and listen. In August 2023, the Loch Ness Center and Loch Ness Exploration partnered on what they called the largest monster hunt in 50 years. The Quest expedition deployed thermal imaging drones across the surface and lowered hydrophones into the water to listen for biological activity at depth. The drones picked up surface disturbances nobody could fully explain. The hydrophones recorded sounds that did not match any known catalog: clicks, low-frequency rumbles, pulses nobody could attribute to a known source. Some of those sounds are biological. A body that large moving through the water at depth produces acoustic signatures, and the eel population the DNA confirmed is more than capable of generating them. Some are geological. The Great Glen Fault is active, and micro-earthquakes along that line send sound through the water in ways nobody has finished cataloging. In 2024, more hydrophone recordings were added to the database. Researchers are building this acoustic library year by year, mapping the soundscape of the deepest lake in Britain. The picture that is emerging is one of a body of water far more alive than anyone realized, not with monsters, with activity, with the deep, slow-moving signatures of something the sonar in 1987 was picking up the whole time, something the BBC's 600 beams in 2003 should have caught and dismissed as noise, something Adrian Shine logged as 3 unexplained contacts. They were never plesiosaurs. They were exactly what the environmental DNA pulled out of the water column. The sonar was never wrong. We just did not know what we were listening to. 35 years on the shore. In 1991, a man named Steve Feltham gave up his job, sold his house, and moved to the shores of Loch Ness to watch the water full time. He has been there ever since. Guinness World Records officially recognized him for the longest continuous monster hunt in history. Feltham has seen things he cannot explain. He has not captured proof, but he has watched the loch every day for 35 years, and he has come around publicly to the eel hypothesis. Not because he wants to, because the evidence finally points there. The people who spent their lives chasing the monster are the ones now telling you what the monster actually is. What is actually down there? The scientific picture is now coming together for the first time in 90 years. There is no plesiosaur in Loch Ness. The idea that marine reptiles survived the extinction event that killed the dinosaurs, adapted to fresh water, and have been breeding in a Scottish lake for 66 million years without leaving a single body or a single fragment of identifiable DNA is not supported by anything. There is no unknown species. The environmental DNA would have caught it. It did not. What there is, what the evidence increasingly supports, is something stranger in its own quiet way. An unusual population of a known species. Eels growing far larger than documented elsewhere. Eels living far longer than expected. Eels surfacing rarely but dramatically. Eels in the dark peat-stained waters of one of Europe's deepest lakes, creating the visual impression of something far more exotic than a fish. And there is one more piece. The loch produces internal waves called seeches, massive pressure waves moving beneath the surface, driven by wind and temperature differentials acting on the long, narrow basin. A seiche can produce upwellings that appear on the surface as humps, wakes, or moving objects. Now imagine a seiche combined with a large eel surfacing at exactly the wrong moment. A hump in the water, a wake with no obvious cause, something dark breaking the surface, then gone. That is exactly what witnesses have been describing for 90 years. The people who saw Nessie were not lying. They were not crazy. They were not hallucinating. They were seeing something real. Just like the people in the 6th century who watched something rise from the River Ness. Just like the Highlanders telling Kelpies stories around their fires. Every generation reached for the only word their world had given them. The framework was wrong. The sightings were real. The Loch Ness Monster is eels. Giant eels. Unusual eels. Eels behaving in ways no eel population anywhere else on Earth has been observed to behave. It is not the answer that believers wanted. It is not the answer that skeptics expected. It is something quietly weirder than either. If you have ever stood at the edge of Loch Ness and stared into that dark surface and wondered if something was looking back, drop a comment below and tell me what you think is really down there. Eels, monsters, leftover prehistoric something, or a creature science has not even named yet. I read every reply. And if this kind of mystery, where the truth is stranger than the legend that replaced it, is the kind of story you want more of, subscribe and stay close. Somewhere in the dark, deep water of one of Scotland's most famous lakes, the eels are still swimming, still surfacing, still creating the disturbances that witnesses report, living, feeding, surfacing, and being mistaken for monsters by a species that has always preferred drama to biology.